Good evening, everyone. Oh, let me ring the meditation bell. Can you hear that okay? Seeing the Zendo. Just, or the residents that are not in the Zendo, just so everyone knows, we're in the middle of a renovation of the Zendo floor, getting it kind of renewed and refreshed after many years, decades. And sorry, the YouTube was coming back through. So we won't be in the Zendo this week. The Zendo is closed. So for all those of you who come to sit with us, please join us from home. We'll have a pre-recorded zazen, and the residents will be in the Saragota Temple, which is kind of small, so there's not enough space for everyone. But hopefully, we'll be opening up the Zendo again on Wednesday next week, and we'll invite you all in then. So tonight, I'm so honored to welcome Rebecca Solnit, who is a wonderful author and friend of Upaya's and Roshi's. Rebecca, do you want to turn your camera and I'll add you to the spotlight here while I say a few things about you. So truly from the cloud, Rebecca Solnit is joining us. She was just here at Upaya a few weeks ago and shot an amazing series on climate change with Roshi, Joan Halifax, and Christiana Figueres. And so you can check that out on our website. I'll put the link in. But just to say a few words about Rebecca, because many of you probably know her. She's a pretty world famous author, but she's also a historian and an activist. She's the author of more than 20 books on feminism, Western and urban history, popular power, social change, and insurrection, wandering and walking, hope and disaster. Her books include Recollections of My Non-Existence, Hope in the Dark, Men Explain Things to Me, and A Paradise Built in Hell, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster. She's a product of the California public education system from kindergarten through graduate school, yay, California. She writes regularly for The Guardian and LitHub and serves on the board of Oil Change International. And she just had an article come out today in The Guardian about Russell Brand. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we will begin with the first before the Dharma talk.
Thank you.
The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning.
Thank you, everybody. It's an honor and a formidable one to be here. I sometimes find that talking to Buddhist communities feels like something in which I'm a very raw amateur, as opposed to some of the other places I talk in which I'm rather case hardened. So I wrote my talk out, and I do feel better about not being in the Zendo, since it turns out that nobody is in the Zendo. And so I'm just zooming it into the living room and all you out there on the interwebs. Thank you, Roshi. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, everyone at Upaya who was so kind, so wonderful, so generous when I was there all last month. Thank you for keeping the practice alive for all of us. I also want to thank the San Francisco Zen Center, where I started sitting in 2001, and to my teacher, Zenke Blanche Hartman there. I learned a lot. I have a lot more to learn. So what I'm about to give is, I hope, a Dharma talk and an interim report on hope, or at least some free-floating ideas on hope. The title I gave this talk, Hope is a Discipline, is a famous sentence by the anti-prison activist Mariame Kaba. She expanded it in an interview saying, I always tell people, for me, hope doesn't preclude feeling sadness or frustration or anger or any other emotion that makes total sense. Hope isn't an emotion, you know. Hope is not optimism. She continues, I think that for me, understanding that is really helpful in my practice around organizing, which is that I believe there's always a potential for transformation and for change, and that is in any direction, good or bad. The idea of hope as a discipline is something I heard from a nun many years ago, who was talking about it in conjunction with making sure we were of the world and in the world. Using it in the afterlife, living in the afterlife already in the present was a form of escape, but that actually it was really, really important for us to live in the world and be of the world, that nun taught us. The hope that she was talking about was this grounded hope that was practiced every day, that people actually practiced all the time. And so Kaba concludes, I bowed down to that. And she adds, I've heard that many years ago and I felt the sense of, oh my God, that speaks to me as a philosophy of living, that hope is a discipline and that we have to practice it every single day. Because in the world in which we live, it's easy to feel a sense of hopelessness, that everything is bad all the time, that there is nothing going to change ever, that people are evil and bad at the bottom. I feel sometimes that it's being proven in various different ways. So I get that. I really get that. I understand why people feel that way. I just choose differently. I choose to think a different way, and I choose to act in a different way. I choose to trust people until they prove themselves untrustworthy. So that's Mariame Kaba. Here's a bit of me. The word hope means different things to different people. Some people conflate it with optimism, although I think they're radically different, even opposite. Optimism assumes a positive outcome. Hope assumes only possibilities. The former requires little of you, the latter much. Hope hands you many burdens that despair and cynicism seem to offer to relieve you of. At least on the surface they seem to, although I believe there are many gifts that also come with hope. And while the tangible gifts may be for others, and hope may hand you obligations and responsibilities, it also gives you a sense of possibility and a sense of power. These are among the deepest and most valuable gifts we can receive. I talk faster than Dharma talk, people talk, but I can't help it. It's my nature. Here I want to say that I don't think hope is an emotion, or at least only an emotion. As Kaba points out, you can be heartbroken, desperate, anxious, and hopeful. People have been hopeful in the most desperate situations, and that's when hope matters. That's what it's for. The Czech playwright Václav Havel says, hope is not prognostication. It is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same thing as joy, that things are going well, or a willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. It's important to say that when Václav Havel says that, he lived in an authoritarian Czechoslovakia. He'd been sent to jail by the regime many times for speaking out for democracy and human rights, for being a gadfly and a provocateur, for being a creative writer in a country that preferred no creativity and imagination. It's easy to read that and know that the Czechoslovakian government would implode, as all the governments of Eastern Europe would, in only a few years afterwards. But he said that at a moment where he didn't know if that regime would outlast his life, a regime in which he couldn't possibly know he would become president of the new Czech Republic after he helped topple the Czechoslovakian regime, and nonviolent direct action civil society activists across Eastern Europe toppled so many regimes at the same time. That magic season of 1989 in Poland and East Germany, in Czechoslovakia and Hungary, in complicated ways in Romania, Bulgaria, and other nations. It was extraordinary and transformative, and one of the things that gave me hope. It's worth noting that the inconceivable happens regularly, and then it comes to seem mundane. The ways in which it was inconceivable themselves become hard to conceive. We live in a world that was inconceivable 50 years ago, and one of the ways I've been trying to help people imagine that despite the catastrophe of climate change, the current round of authoritarianism, the other crises of our times, there is a good future possible, is to think about the moment we're in right now in 2023 and how inconceivable it was in 1973. 50 years ago, in 1973, the Black civil rights movement was often thought to have run aground, but rights for gay and lesbian and queer people had really begun to take off. Rights for women and the women's movement had really begun to take off. Indigenous rights after the Alcatraz occupation had really begun to take off. I'm a year older than Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. I was born in a world that had no environmental movement, although traditional peoples and indigenous peoples remembered what industrial society forgot. But nevertheless, the environmental movement was just taking off in 1973 and had just accomplished some major things with the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, was just beginning to really become a movement as groups like the Sierra Club stopped being just conservation groups, protecting isolated pretty places, and began to understand the interconnectedness of all things, the systemicness of all things, that you had to deal with air pollution and water pollution, with how we lived and traveled, with what we ate, that you couldn't just set places apart because everything is connected. This is one of the exciting ways, I think, in which a lot of contemporary scientific theory and Buddhist beliefs have really converged in recent years, the recognition of codependent arising, interconnectedness, the rest. And so if we recognize that the world we're in good ways and bad ways, was absolutely inconceivable, things like marriage and marriage equality, things like renewable energy, capable of absolutely replacing fossil fuel for almost everything we do, the effectiveness of sun and wind, then you understand that the world of 2073 is unimaginable to us, but it's not impossible. And whatever's good in it, may somebody in 2073 be thinking us in 2023, the way that I can now thank the people in 1973 who brought us the best things in our era, the ways that we live in an improvement over 1973, and that we live in deep transformation. So meanwhile, Czechoslovakia in 1989, the collapse of that government and many governments came as a complete surprise to everyone, the people there, the leaders of the Soviet Union, the leaders of the Western world. They saw the restlessness, the movement stirring in Germany. Poland had long had its solidarity movement, but nobody saw what was going to happen. Nobody expected it to happen so completely and absolutely. I went back actually and read newspapers and interviews from the summer and fall of 1989 to confirm that it was utterly unexpected. And so it's worth remembering Havel being hopeful is not in the triumphalism of his work paying off, but in the process of remaining committed to it when it was unimaginable that it would pay off the way that it did. So this is why I have taken to saying that I respect despair as an emotion, but not as an analysis. I understand how people feel despair, how people look at all the terrible things happening and think they're determinative, think we can't turn it around, think that the future can't be better than the present, but can only be worse. Or rather, they feel those things, and often they feel them based on incomplete information about the science, the technology, the climate movement, and maybe incomplete knowledge of history, which also brings us surprises regularly, as I just described, and also great improvements as the collapse of the Eastern Europe regimes demonstrates. So I want to argue that hope is the right moral position to take, but not just the right moral one. I think it's the accurate factual stance. While I'm at it, I'll try to make a case that Buddha's teachings, or what little I know of them, help us recognize the dependent co-arising of all things, the non-separation, the interconnectedness, that means that all of us are participants. And all that also means the basic uncertainty of what's going to happen. One of the things you can also see with Eastern Europe is that the participants who matter are not the ones who look powerful or important before the world changes, not the ones people anticipate. So, and also I think Buddhism and the sciences and history converge, and the fundamentalness of change, and that despair often comes from a sense that nothing's going to change, or we can't change it, or it can only change for the worse. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who founded San Francisco Zen Center, was once asked by a sheepish student to sum up Zen in one sentence, and without missing a beat, Suzuki Roshi replied, "Everything changes." He didn't even need 3 words to answer, just 2. Change itself is both destabilizing and reassuring. We're not stuck, but we don't know what's coming next either. And codependent arising means we're participants in it. There's a book by Pema Chodron, I'm sure a lot of you know, with a lovely title, a lovely counterintuitive title, Comfortable with Uncertainty, that gets at something really important, that actually most of us are uncomfortable with uncertainty, so uncomfortable that a lot of us sometimes substitute certainty for it, which is like substituting an imaginary thing for a real thing, because uncertainty is what we've actually got, which is why it might be good to get comfortable with it. So we don't know what's going to happen, and whether you're on the scale of your own personal life or the of global history, there are surprises and things that seem logical or obvious in retrospect, but that were unforeseeable beforehand. We don't know what's going to happen, which is the essence of uncertainty. Pema Chodron writes, "Letting there be room for not knowing is the most important thing of all. When there's a big disappointment, we don't know if that's the end of the story. It may just be the beginning of a great adventure. Life is like that. We don't know anything. We call something bad, we call it good, but really we just don't know. But also we don't know what's going to happen, because what's going to happen is due in part to what we do or don't do. The future is being made in the present, and we have agency in the present. That our actions matter. We are making the future now. Both optimists and pessimists, to say nothing of cynics and defeatists, tend to speak as though the future has already been decided, as though it's foreordained, predetermined, and as though they have certainty about it. And that, I guess, is comfortable with certainty, but it also is wrong, because we don't know what's going to happen, partly because we're deciding what's going to happen by what we do or don't do. So this is nowhere more true than with climate. And this is, if it's a Dharma talk at all, a climate Dharma talk. So it's nowhere more true than with climate, where what we do in this decade decides what kind of earth there will be for thousands of years to come, for the oceans, the mountains, the forests, the grasslands, the skies, for the whales, the swallows, the snakes, the pelicans I saw today floating in formation across the smoky sky at the Pacific Ocean, the earthworms I don't see underground doing their crucial work, the coyotes you can hear howl from Upaya, the children born yesterday and their great-great-great-great-grandchildren, for humanity from Alaska to Botswana, for all of us, for all of life, all the life we know that exists in the universe on this planet, we're deciding what it's going to be like for the next 10,000 years with what we do or fail to do in this decade. That's what science tells us. This is the decisive decade. And it's not decided yet, because the best case scenario we can still reach for, as the Secretary of the United Nations, a great voice for climate, reminded us again today, the best case scenario is radically different than the worst case scenario. If we do everything we can versus we do nothing, is determinative. If there's nothing, if you know what's going to happen, if the future is already decided, then you've gotten yourself off the hook. You can kick back and relax. Or at least for those of us in the comfortable world, those of us who aren't directly impacted, we get to act as though that's true. Because for us, saying there's nothing we can do makes our lives easier. For people in desperate situations, it means surrendering to direct harm, immediate harm. Their children are going to starve. The dictator will be powerful forever. They'll never get out of the death camp or the gulag. The torture will never end. The destruction will never end. The land will be destroyed. And so desperate people mostly don't surrender. They may feel despair. They may feel all kinds of sorrow and pain and suffer deeply, but they tend to not give up. And I've learned so much from them. The Zapatistas, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, the survivors of the death camp, like Viktor Frankl, at my own ancestors who struggled. So certainty justifies inaction. Uncertainty demands action. And inaction itself is a kind of action, a decision not to participate in shaping the future, which, like not voting, not responding to somebody who's drowning, not helping somebody you see in an emergency, that's also a form of action. There is no real inaction. One of the common misnomers of people who don't know much about Buddhism, I grew up with this idea that all Buddhists are really just furiously meditating away to get off the cycle of birth and death and kind of hightail it to nirvana, lickety-split. One of the things I love about Mahayana Buddhism, and where it dovetails, I think, with activism, is the Bodhisattva vow, to continue on the wheel of birth and death until all beings are liberated, is first of all a gesture of responsibility for others, for the well-being of the whole. But what really impresses me now is that it's also an assertion of your essential robustness, of seeing yourself as strong, able to give, to care, to do, to have agency, as a participant in making the world, an actor in history, not just acted upon. It's a very different sense of self than many other aspects of contemporary mainstream culture give us, when they encourage us to see ourselves not as actors, but only acted upon, as fragile rather than strong, as helpless, to see all difficulty as damage and all damage as irrecoverable. I'm always so grateful to Roshi for talking about post-traumatic growth and seeing suffering sometimes as the crucible in which we're forged. And I just heard something remarkable from Andrea Gibson, Colorado's new poet laureate, somebody dealing with, I believe, terminal cancer, a non-binary person, and a profoundly insightful spiritual and poetic person, when they said that they used to regard difficulty as something that wasn't supposed to happen, whether it was a terminal diagnosis or the snowplow knocking over the mailbox. And their life changed when they accepted that maybe difficulty is normal, it's supposed to happen, we're made to deal with it. And I think that the Bodhisattva vow incorporates something of that. Life is not necessarily supposed to be easy, predictable, and safe. And since I began talking and writing about hope 20 years ago, I've also had to spend a lot of time confronting the logic of an attachment to hopelessness and defeatism. What does it give you? It gives you a lot, but I think that depends on what you want. And I came up with a parable recently, a shipwreck in which passengers are cast into the waters as the ship goes under. The first set of passengers says, "We're all going to drown, there's nothing we can do." And they decide to do nothing, and then they drown and are proven right. The second set of passengers says, "We don't know whether we'll survive this, but we'll try. And maybe some of those get picked up by another ship or find some wreckage to float on until it gets near shore, or actually swim to land, or the lifeboats in which a lucky third group are bobbing around." Some of the second group drown. They're right, they don't know, and they may be wrong that their efforts will end in success, although they didn't assume that. They just thought it was worth trying. They accepted the unpredictability of the moment. I think it's better to fail at success than succeed at failure. And there's a lot of succeeding at failure out there, certainly in the activist circles I have been moving in a lot of my adult life. The funny thing is, though, I think even people banking on failure are often wrong, and you find that they don't come back when their predictions don't seem true. One of the interesting things I think is when you sound cynical, defeatist, tough, despondent, you're often seen as pragmatic, realistic. You usually don't get reproached for it, but if you're hopeful, you often get told you're a dreamer, that's impossible, it will never happen. A nice little thing happened to me yesterday. I picked up a card, or I opened a poetry book that I hadn't looked at in a long time. And one of those little activist handout cards announcing an action fell out of it. It was for a protest against the Keystone Pipeline, which would have brought the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have brought the dirtiest crude in the world from the Alaska tar sands to refineries in the United States for export. And it took 10 years to stop it. And all through those 10 years, there were people who said we would never win, we were wasting our time, we weren't going to succeed. And I loved seeing this card. It was like that Václav Havel quote, is from a moment before we knew we could win, and looking back after we've conclusively won was really interesting. It's hard to remember those moments when we don't know what will happen. The uncertainty we have once, the uncertainty about the future once it becomes the more or less certainty we have in the present. So seriously, about those lifeboats, people directly facing danger are usually highly motivated to do everything they can for themselves and others. It's what my studies of disaster taught me. In crisis, most people are brave, altruistic, creative, resourceful, deeply empathic, and often quite selfless. It's almost a kind of Buddhist non-attachment in the presence of unpredictability, the awareness of death, and as often as a survivor of the Nicaragua earthquake of 1973 told me, something that makes you feel much more alive because of that kind of uncertainty and immediacy. So it's at a remove that people get more invested in justification for inaction, which is dangerous because then you're giving up on behalf of others, who in most cases haven't given up on themselves. Fintan Lutuna Tambua is a climate activist, indigenous to Fiji in the South Pacific. He's the husband of Thelma Young Lutuna Tambua, with whom I've created the Not Too Late online project and co-edited the book of that title, which includes Roshi. And in that book, Fenton says that too often he and his people and the people of the other island nations of the South Pacific were told, in his words, that we were mere victims of climate change and needed to be saved. We were recipients of a white savior narrative that really painted us as folks who couldn't tap into our own agency or into our own innovativeness. So that as that configuration of people, we know there needs to be a more nuanced story that is told about us. And we really need to claim ourselves as the heroes in these stories. We started thinking about what that looked like. There's so many beautiful things about warriorship and stewardship from the islands that we want to uplift. And so we're just like, let's just keep this simple and go with calling ourselves the Pacific Climate Warriors. And they coined this incredible slogan they use all the time: we are not drowning, we are fighting. It was a simple sentence, Fenton continues, that became an anti-narrative to the dominant story told about us. All of these stories were told about us without us. And it was really a moment of claiming back our full identities and full narratives. Another Pacific Island indigenous leader, climate leader, Julian Aguan, says, all this is to say, if my corner of earth had an anthem, it would be this: to hell with drowning. I love that defiance, that ferocity in the face of menace and destruction. And I want to cite another voice here, the poet and political visionary Audre Lorde, who said, to refuse to participate in the shaping of our future is to give it up. Do not be misled into passivity, either by false security, they don't mean me, or by despair, there's nothing we can do. Each of us, she finishes, must find our work and do it. The desire for certainty and perhaps the fear of being wrong lead to this defeatism, that we can't win means not taking the chance to win, which is also the chance to lose. But both swimmers and sinkers were choosing a path that helped determine outcome. You choose to do something or not to. You're making a future of sorts with your action or with your inaction, which is why the climate scientist Michael Mann talks about climate inactivists as well as climate activists. You're not just accepting a given outcome by doing nothing. You're participating in deciding what the outcome is. We say inevitable a lot, but maybe we should say evitable, able to be avoided or prevented more. And likely your actions were driven by what you thought was possible and your relationship to hope. And people think hope is this very fancy, special, glittery thing that lucky people have or naive people have. But hope is so present in our everyday activities. You stand at the bus stop hoping that the bus is gonna come. You do these really simple things every day, hoping that the outcome will be what you intend it to be. You go to the farmer's market hoping there are good pears there that day. These are practical assessments in which our chances of desired outcome are good, but recognizing them makes it possible to recognize virtually everything we do has some kind of hope attached to it when it doesn't have certainty built into it. And sometimes even when we think we're certain about what's going to happen, it doesn't happen. I'm sitting here in the main room of my apartment, and I did turn on my sink the other day and no water came out. It didn't come out for 4 days. Sometimes our most confident assumptions get turned upside down about who somebody is, how something works, what's possible. The defeatists mistake hope for optimism, confidence, or feeling good. Hope is for what you don't have, and when you don't have the most essential ingredients of survival, you may feel devastated, exhausted, and heartbroken. And yet, so many in that situation aren't hopeless. You don't wish you could sit in a rose garden with your beloved. When you are, in fact, sitting in a rose garden with your beloved, you wish it when the rose garden's far away and perhaps you have no beloved, or your beloved is far away too. You wish for health when you're sick, love when you're lonely, safety when you're in danger. Hope is for what's not here yet. It's a kind of faith in possibility, a courage to try and perhaps to fail, a reach for possibility, a belief that things can be different. There's foolish hope that overlaps with magical thinking, that the ship is not really sinking, that positive thinking by itself leads to the desired outcome. But there's also what Roshi calls wise hope, which uses knowledge of the past and the possibilities of strategy and tactics to try to realize those hopes. And here's the thing about the unknowability of the future, it's uncertainty. We can't and don't know what will happen, but we can learn a lot from the past. Learn that ordinary people banded together sometimes have great power, that ideas matter, that we live in a world considered impossible in so many ways not long ago, that history is full of sudden changes that caught people by surprise, even if those surprises seem predictable or logical in retrospect. They were unpredictable, and more than that, unpredicted until they came to pass. There's a Buddhist critique of hope that says it's an attachment to outcome, but an embrace of uncertainty perhaps accepts the uncertainty of outcome. And one of the fascinating things about political activism, as I've witnessed it, is that actions have unpredictable results. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Some things you never imagined would happen happened anyway. There's a book I haven't read properly, but I'm in love with its title. Win Without Victory is the title, and it's by the head of the Center for Constitutional Rights. What he means by that phrase is that sometimes his organization goes to court and sometimes they lose. But even when they lose a case, they've often changed the conversation, changed something else, changed something that will happen down the road, something that will happen in another way, changed consciousness, changed values. That you often work towards a specific goal and you often don't arrive at it, but that doesn't mean nothing happened. Some of the defeatism I see comes from a simplistic vision of what changes, often a sense that if we demand something on Tuesday and we don't get it on Wednesday, then we failed. When in fact, it works often in such indirect, slow, and unpredictable ways. One of my favorite things in life is indirect consequences, the serpentine routes that change takes. For example, the Dakota Access Pipeline struggle on the Standing Rock Reservation. You may remember in 2016, in the simplest possible terms, did not stop the Dakota Access Pipeline from crossing the river just above the reservation. So in the simplest possible terms, it lost. And of course, the struggle isn't over. The lawsuits continue. They may yet win in the courts. But also, if we do everything the climate requires of us, there will be a moment when that no oil runs through that pipeline and they dismantle it just because we've changed the world in a much bigger way. We've exited the age of fossil fuels. But so much happened besides stopping a pipeline. One of the remarkable things that happened was that a young woman who'd been a waitress in Brooklyn, grown up in Queens and just north of there, the Bronx and just north of there, got in a station wagon with her friends, as so many young people and not so young people around the country and beyond did, to come to Standing Rock because they were so moved and inspired by what was going on. Hold that thought about that young woman in the station wagon, because what happened at Standing Rock was possibly the biggest gathering of Native nations ever. The first time all 7 bands of the Lakota and Dakota had come together since the 19th century. It was a moment when veterans of the US Army showed up by the hundred and on bended knee apologized for the genocide against Native Americans of the US Army over the centuries. A remarkable moment of healing. What happened in the struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock gave the young people of that reservation a sense that they mattered, a sense of hope and confidence in their own value they didn't have before. A wonderful man I worked with during the pandemic from Standing Rock told me, and another climate activist told me, it did that for a lot of other young Native people across the world. These things all are so beautiful and important and valuable and transformative. And as for that young woman, she was so moved by what she saw at Standing Rock. She came home and decided to run for office, and she ran against a congressman as a young 20-something unknown, younger than any woman who'd ever been elected to Congress before. She ran against the 3rd most powerful Democrat in Congress. The odds, you can imagine, were not something most people assumed were good. But she won, and you've heard of her because her name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and her election isn't where this story stops, because she introduced the Green New Deal to Congress that was created by the Sunrise Movement, the young people's climate movement that really launched in 2018, the same year as her campaign. And we all know the Green New Deal did not pass. And again, we can say that it was failure, but it changed the conversation in the most beautiful and extraordinary ways. all my life people talked about jobs versus the environment, but it was called the Green New Deal because it recognized doing what the crisis requires of us is a huge building project. It will create hundreds of thousands of great new jobs. It changed the conversation about what was possible, what we need to do, what we can do. And it influenced a lot of other places to do versions of the Green New Deal. And it became really kind of a template for Joe Biden's platform as a presidential candidate. And then it became a template for Build Back Better, the visionary climate legislation the Biden administration introduced in the spring of 2022. And the Green New Deal didn't pass, Build Back Better didn't pass because of one obstructionist, Joe Manchin, the coal baron senator from West Virginia. And then came the Inflation Reduction Act, which did pass. And so, and which continues to have an effect as it will pour hundreds of billions of dollars into transformation. There are bad things in it. There are things I wished weren't there. But it's also the biggest piece of climate legislation the US Congress has ever passed. It's transformative, and it too has indirect consequences. It's caused a lot of European nations to look at us and decide to catch up, to up their funding for their climate transition away from fossil fuel. Just as the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which it thought it could get away with partly because the rest of Europe was so dependent on its fossil fuel, prompted a lot of Europe, the EU specifically, to speed the transition away from fossil fuel in response. So this beautiful unpredictability, these glorious indirect consequences. And I should probably wrap up. And I want to wrap up with one more remarkable and beautiful story about change, about transformation, about unpredictability, about possibility, about hope. In 2019, Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate activist who galvanized a global youth climate movement, including in Asia and Africa, gave a talk to the British Parliament. Greta Thunberg, as you know, had started when she was 15 alone. So, and I want to say a word about her impact before I quote her, because a new study just came out that reports that 30% of people in Switzerland, not in Sweden where Greta is from, but Switzerland, report that they changed their daily habits because of her. And it's easy to look at things that aren't measurable, tangible, quantifiable, and dismiss them as things that don't matter. Sometimes we get studies and reports like this that tell us that they're huge and they do matter, even when we can't measure them. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And so back to Thunberg's talk, in which she said a remarkable and famous thing. She said, avoiding climate breakdown will require cathedral thinking. We must lay the foundation while we may not know exactly how to build the ceiling. And that reminds me of a poem by the great Spanish poet, Antonio Machado, who wrote in the English translation, walker, there is no road. The road is made by walking. I'll read it again because it's such a beautiful couplet. Walker, there is no road. The road is made by walking, meaning that the path ahead doesn't already exist. We have to make it. Our actions make it. We don't need to follow a path. We build the path. Our walk is itself the path. The action is the thing, not the object. So you choose the route, and then maybe you create something other people can follow. This is the road, not as something existing, but as something we're deciding upon. And it's such an allegory for the way we're always deciding where to go in the future. Thunberg's statement means something similar. The great cathedrals were built over centuries, sometimes as many as 5 centuries. Antonio Gaudi's Barcelona cathedral is famous because it's been worked on for almost 140 years, which seems long now, but it's not longer than some of the other great cathedrals. So, and a lot of times these cathedrals were built as styles changed. Romanesque became Gothic, Gothic became High Gothic, as engineering techniques, structural technologies evolved as they worked. as regimes came and went. And I think what Thunberg meant is we need to work on this problem. What we understand and what seems possible now will change, but we can't wait until we know exactly what's the best thing to do until everything is finalized. We have to keep experimenting. We have to keep pushing forward into the dark. And it's been interesting because one of the things I find fascinating and really exhilarating is 20 years ago, we had no real alternative to fossil fuel. Sun and wind, renewable energy, other than hydropower, was really weak and ineffectual and expensive and utterly inadequate to replace burning fossil fuel, the burning that sends carbon up into the sky where it becomes carbon dioxide, the insulating blanket that heats our planet and destabilizes the climate. We've had an energy revolution and it's been so slow and incremental, like Greta's influence on the Swiss people. It's easy not to have noticed that it was happening. But one of the funny things that's happened to me because of caring about climate is I look at graphs all the time. I look at science graphs. There's two graphs you see about renewable energy constantly. There's a graph going radically upward. That's the graph of its implementation. And then there's the graph of its cost, which goes equally radically down. The price of solar has dropped 90% in the last decade. Solar is also cheaper than any other form of electricity in 91% of the world. And it's a new technology. We're still figuring out battery storage, the best and less impactful materials. We still have problems to solve, but we have to keep building the cathedral of a better world, a more abundant world, a more just world, a world without the poison that fossil fuel is, which kills 8 million people a year just through particulates inhaled directly. There was an extraordinary thing that happened in Pennsylvania recently where they shut down a coal burning plant. I think it was actually a production facility that burned coal. And people with heart trouble reporting to the hospital dropped dramatically. It turned out literally having that plant near where you lived was hard on your heart and broke a lot of those hearts so that people died. Fossil fuel is poison and we've normalized it. We now have to denormalize it. So I find that fascinating too. And I want to wind up with there's a fantastic documentary movie about the journey from the founding of the Sunrise Movement and the election of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that same year of 2018, only 5 years ago now, but such a different era for what we thought was possible, what we had accomplished. So, and it's a wonderful movie. It does something I rarely see documentaries about politics do, charting the course of change all the way through, which is why it's called To the End by Rachel Lears. Go look for it. I think you can rent it now. So, and it traces what I described, how these events precipitated the conversation around the Green New Deal, Biden's platform when he was a candidate, Build Back Better, etc. So, and there's this wonderful scene in it in which Alex O'Keefe, who was the creative director of Sunrise, is unloading a station wagon, and he declares, people who do nothing, people who have not even canvassed or anything, they start critiquing our strategy to win. But how are you going to win? What's your strategy? Is it realistic? Can we win? Who cares if we can win, man? We're just unpacking boxes. You do things step by step. And he says this as he's unpacking boxes. And I love his sense that, Walker, there is no path. The path is made by walking or by unloading boxes. It's all an experiment. You'll find out if the experiment works only by doing it. And it's a very simple, pragmatic statement, but it's also a profound statement about coming to terms with the unpredictable. It's cathedral thinking. You build the foundation while you're still figuring out the ceiling. Thank you all. May we look up from our foundations and see the most beautiful ceilings, or beyond them, the skies and the stars and the possibilities. Thank you all so much. And I'll see you back in the Zendo one of these days soon.
Thank you, Rebecca. And love to you from Kamakura. So grateful for your words.
Thank you, Roshi. I have no idea what crazy time it is there, but you're always surprising in your wakefulness too.
Thank you. I will see you soon, my dear. My heart to you.
And to you. And thank you, everyone at Upaya. It was so wonderful being with you last month. I'm coming back. Hello, Wendy. And hello, everyone on YouTube. I know I can't see you, but I feel you there. And I'm grateful for your presence and your thoughtfulness, your interest in these ideas. Thank you, Noah, for making it all possible. You tech genius.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And thanks for bringing in that cathedral thinking from Greta Thunberg. It just is a remarkable analogy for so many things. And I love how you just bring the Dharma into the practice of saving the world, which, you know, it is, but you really bring it home to where we're at. So thank you for that. Just a few words for what's coming up. We have several online programs this week. We have Hidden Lamp with Reverend Zenshin tomorrow night. No, wait. No, we have Gather and Grieve tomorrow night. So please join Reverend Jessica McKinney. And we have Hidden Lamp with Zenshin Florence Capello on Saturday. And then we have Four Flavors of Love with Frank Ostaseski. That's his program on the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, starting on Sunday. And then in person, if you're a local, please join us for Zazenkai with Sensei Kozan on September 30th. So in about 10 days. The Zendo will be finished then, so be the first into the bright, shiny floor. And then, of course, practice periods starting on October 5th. So join us for those. And Rebecca, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. Usually, you know, those of us who are writing the descriptions are trying to get good quotes. Your talk is basically one good quote after another. So
thank you so much. I had a lot of help from Audre Lorde and Greta Thunberg and that young man unpacking the station wagon and so many others. Mariam Kaba with her Hope is a Discipline.
Beautiful. Thank you. We'll end with the 4 great bodhisattva vows and have the residents join us here. I'll just mute you, Rebecca, so that we have one voice. Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it.